Well, fortunately for me, it is a busy Monday morning, September 23rd, 2024. Um, I've got three things stacked, and well, what I wanted to do was talk about something that's actually been on my mind for a while, and it's about cash flow. That's something that's not talked a lot about here, at least among us gig economy folk. It is a business term, a very important business term, in fact. Um, what is cash flow? Simply put, cash flow is the very thing that um, keeps us in business. How does it keep? How does cash flow keep us in business? Cash flow, simply put, is what pays for many of our business outlays on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. Yes, one can, yes, building up business credit is important. It's an important facet of business growth. But yet the ability to pay back things that are leveraged is directly to one's cash flow. There are those of us of a business and financial acumen who make the argument that cash flow is more important than profitability. Now, how is that possible? I want to now, a business can be making profits. It can be very profitable. It appears that it's doing quite well, but there could become there. What can happen is a disruption in a business's cash flow, and then all of a sudden that business may become insolvent. But let's stick with something that's a little more inspiring, at least for the moment. A business's ability to attract investors, secure financing, and even expand and grow is maybe predicated upon its cash flow, an indicator of a company's financial health. So that's a view from 30,000 feet. What about from our level, ground level? You and I, 1099s. Most of us are sole proprietors. We have sole proprietorship LLCs, along those lines. What are sources of cash flow? For many of us who are involved in the gig economy, our cash flow may be tied to the very gigs that we work, gig apps that we work. I've called them revenue streams, sources of incomes. In my business enterprise, for example, I've mentioned four different areas. I mentioned gig food delivery apps. I've mentioned last mile gig delivery apps. I've mentioned other 1099 and cash game opportunities, and also brokered opportunities, brokered loads, brokered opportunities. Those are my primary sources of cash flow, and that's where I kind of can chart out where money be coming in. For another person, it could be, yes, gig apps or their W-2. And for another person, it may be tied to a contract opportunity that they have, and maybe some other 1099 and cash game opportunities. And for a bonus, for somebody whom I know, it may be the ability to incorporate gig app income, brokered opportunities, a hybrid of brokered opportunities and gig apps, and other 1099 cash game opportunities or cash game work. Now, other recognized measurements of cash flow are accounts receivables versus accounts payables, which indicates ability to pay back its debts. Another recognized measurement of cash flow is investments and maybe other business enterprises that contribute to the parent company's bottom line. Now, I want to interject this just for the sake of conversation, because I noticed on a posting where some other gig workers are saying how it's hard to rent, hard to finance vehicles, hard to get credit cards and so forth, being a 1099, particularly someone whose income has derived by gig apps. I'm going to say it is possible. I've even shown how it was possible for me here on the Gig Geezer channel. And really what it amounts to is, if you have the credit score and the right debt to income ratio, You can be financed. You can get credit cards. You can apply and be approved for credit cards, and you could apply for rental apartments, rental homes. Now, the difference though is if you're trying to buy a home, that is a different animal. In that home buying, there's so much scrutiny with home buying. It just makes you wonder if it's worth it. But home buying, you definitely got to show that you've got some income. And one way as a 1099 of way you show the way you show income is to pay yourself. So that means you create a payroll account either by QuickBooks or some other payroll service, and you pay yourself on a regular basis. Now, that's just some extra information. I've often said that gig apps are attractive because of our ability to access money earned much sooner than W-2s. And as many are aware, by and large, W-2s pay mostly weekly, bi-weekly, and in some cases monthly. Whereas a gig app gives you the ability to bridge that cash gap by the immediacy of which that money is accessible to us. In short, there's a greater possibility of improving your cash flow by working gig apps. That's what makes gig apps so attractive. It's the immediacy of access of money, which improves your cash flow to take care of what you need to take care of. Now, as a 1099, if you've been at it long enough, like I have, your bills are not set up to where you may pay. They may be due like certain specific days of the week, like or certain specific days of the month. Like when I was a W-2, I could set up like, and when I was married, I knew that the car note was set up for a certain time of the month, then the house note was set up for a certain time of the month, and then other bills were kind of set up somewhere in that range. As a 1099, what ends up happening is that, at least in my experience, I have something that's due damn near every day, and so cash flow is very important. Now I'll talk more about handling of bills and all that a little later as well. So I think we can agree that even if it's not how my bills are set up, but just looking at your own situation, I think we can agree that cash flow is important so that you can take care of what you need to take care of. Now, what are some examples of how you try to set up then your cash flow? Now, ideally, you want to have a good mix of cash flow based on gig apps, ideally. But some of that is also dependent upon market situations, market conditions, in that it could be that certain gig apps there's more opportunities on certain gig apps than other gig apps, and those gig apps pay at different intervals. So what are some of those intervals? I think most of us can agree that gig food delivery apps, you have access to that money on a daily basis. Yes, you could talk about that. You can also cash out up to so many times a day on those apps. You can even say that about rideshare. But for the sake of this conversation, it's money that is accessible on a daily basis. There are some last mile gig delivery apps in which you're able to be paid same day, depending on when the project is completed. Otherwise, you're looking at some point within within 3 to 5 business days. There are some that say 5 to 7 business days, and then there are some that say twice a month, and then there are even a couple of them out there that say once a month. So this is where the balance of gig apps come into play, and that what you're hoping is that if you may have something that pay like next week, you'll be able to make money on other gig apps or some other opportunities that fills in that void to take care of other things that may become due or may need to be addressed. Now, I know I've talked for about 10 minutes into this segment of the Gig Geezer, and if you like the content that's been provided in this segment or in any other segment, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. I've also mentioned in past Gig Geezer segments about contractual situations. Now, I don't want to say that I've been a critic of contracts. If anything, what I've said is that I prefer to have more flexibility and autonomy, because there comes but for some, they feel that having contractual situations is the way to go to build their personal enterprise, or to go about doing their personal enterprise. So whatever works for you, that's fine. But what I think we can agree upon is that in contractual situations, you're only going to be paid certain times of a month. It may be weekly, or it may be a net 30 situation in which you're paid monthly, 30 days after you've completed the work that was agreed upon. So the biggest concern with your cash flow then is that client, or that individual, that client, business or client individual, pays when they're supposed to. Because if there's a disruption in that money not coming when it should, first of all, you're going to feel as if you've been shall we say, you've been taken, and that you've done some free labor and have been exploited. But secondly, now you've got to scramble to make up for that income, that cash flow. You got to make up for that cash flow, that income that hasn't come in. I think that is a fair argument or concern with contractual situations. So while a contractual situation gives you a sense of business proficiency, meaning that yes, you've been successful at negotiating a potentially sustainable situation, there's still the possibility you may not be paid when you expect to be paid. Now, that comes to a term called account receivables, and certain contractual situations may fall into that category of account receivables. For that matter, certain 1099 cash game opportunities may also fall into cash receivables. And if a person or business is slow at paying you, that may disrupt your cash flow and your ability to address the things that you need to on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. Now, I'll share this as I've shared previously, and it's something I've actually shared both privately and here on the Gig Geezer channel. Nearly 20 years ago, I had my biggest client, my biggest insurance client, went out of business because of what amounts to was a seizing up of cash flow. This company, for the longest, had great cash flow. They had employees in multiple states. They had accounts in multiple states. They were able to weather many tight situations due also to their cash reserves. But then they reached a point where the money wasn't coming in and there wasn't much left in the cash reserves. Bottom line, people weren't paying them as they should. And ultimately, they shut their doors. And that cost me several $1,000s a month in income. Now, ultimately, we can only control what we can control, which I'm finding to be true even at this stage in life. There's only so much that we can. So we try to do the best that we can at being a good administrator of our business enterprises. So then, how do we improve our cash flow? One of them is managing our expenses. Now, obviously, everyone's situation is different. I kind of hinted at my expense situation where I've got an outlay of things almost on a daily basis, but it's not exactly a daily basis. But I certainly have to have a certain amount of cash flow and or personal liquidity in order to address those things on, yes, a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. So then you've got to keep a rein on your expenses. There are those incidentals that occur. Like for me earlier this year when I had to replace the front end on my van, that was $1,450. Fortunately, I was able to withstand that. I had and also have cash flow to recover from it. Bottom line is that, simply put, if you have more money coming in than you have going out, you're able to operate at a greater profit and also have a healthier cash flow. Another thing to help improve your cash flow is diversity. Diversify whenever possible. Give yourself as many revenue streams as possible. You also don't want to have one that's a big pull or strain on your overall personal business economy. And you also don't want to have that one. You also don't want to be so reliant upon that one business stream that it may affect everything else. The next point plays into something that I'm always talking about. One way of improving your cash flow is that you put yourself in a position that you don't accept anything and everything. You've got to understand your business situation to the extent that you don't want to be putting yourself in a position that you are paying them to move their stuff. You are in business to be paid to move their stuff, not you paying them to move their stuff. So that means I'm not even going to say the word. I'll just leave it at that. So that leads into a final thing. I've often said too that if you want to see business-like results, you have to treat what you do as a business. And being mindful of cash flow is just one of the components into running an effective business operation. Hopefully you got something out of this. Hopefully it may inspire you to rethink how you're going about doing your personal business enterprise. And if you like the content that's been provided in this segment of the Gig Geezer or in any other segment of the Gig Geezer, hit that subscribe button, give my content a thumbs up, share my content among others, and I definitely welcome your comments in the section below. I'm Inwood Lane. As always, may your grind and may your hustle continue.